Restart that again. Here we go. What's up, world? Welcome to the special edition of I Mix What I Like. At I Mix What I Like for all your relevant social media. I Mix What I Like.org for all that and more. I'm Jared Ball, happy to play host. And of course, we're joined for this very special edition of I Mix What I Like, live and direct, as often as we can get him. Our brother Dhoruba bin-Wahad, who again, I think is our finest living philosopher, political activist, organizer, and philosopher, former member of the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, the Panther 21, and back with us again, Dhoruba bin-Wahad. Welcome back. Good morning to you. Oh, did we lose him? Oh, brother Dhoruba, what happened? All right, let's see. Hold tight. Let's see if we can get him back. I'm not sure what happened. We just had him here. But what we want to do is actually use this hour or so to raise money for him. So let me go ahead and get his information up while we do that. And folks can send, let me adjust this because he added his Cash App, and then we'll see if we can get him to come back in here. But we were just talking, he was breaking stuff down. Let's see, his Cash App is there. Get that up. And give me 1 second while I try to get him back on the line. Well, good people, little internet struggle that Dhoruba is having. He is rebooting and trying to get on right now. In the meantime, if you want to drop any questions or comments in, we're happy to have them. Good morning to you. If anybody wants to, we can, hold tight while he's getting himself together and hopefully joining us here in just a minute. We were set to have a pretty exciting conversation about the Marshall Plan, CIA propaganda, and how all of that, as he was breaking it down just before we went live. And here we go. Let's see this again. Here we go. There we go.
Am I on?
You're on. You're on and live and direct.
I can't hear you coming in kind of. Say that again. Test that again.
You're on live and direct.
Yeah, the volume. Something's wrong with the mic.
You're on you sound good over here.
I'm better now. You okay?
Yeah, you sound good over here. So I was just letting folks know what we're trying to do this morning. We're looking always to talk with you anyway, but also using this time to hopefully raise a couple of dollars for you and your efforts. So people should absolutely hit you up on your Cash App as they see down there below. and DhorubaBin-Wahad.com for more information and all of that. So as I was just trying to let folks know, Dhoruba, you wanted to lay out some things as it relates to the Marshall Plan, propaganda, and the CIA in the post Second World War, Cold War moment, and how that is all impacting on us today. That's obviously something of great importance and interest to me and my own work, but and I'm sure to those who would be tuning in to this live and later on. So did you want to start with any particular question or point? Did you want me to, did you want to just pick up where you were starting before we went live? What you think?
Well, I think we should pick up where before we went when we first started, because the only reason that I was going into all of this, and I had mentioned that that documentary, the institutional propaganda about the CIA, inside the CIA, and how it started.
Uh-oh, what happened to your volume? Did we lose him again?
And,
hey, Dhoruba, there you go.
That interrupted me.
Yeah, what happened?
Your sound is messed up again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine. Just keep going.
You're not coming in fine. I don't know what happened.
You're good over here. Just go ahead.
You're okay. Yeah. So what I was dealing with was how history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, and the present circumstances where we at right now. It's a consequence of how the United States emerged after World War II. And wait 1 second, please.
Yeah, that's cool. And 43C Marsh, we're gonna try to. I'm assuming that's my dude Chris Marshall and the Omni African Collective. We're gonna get to these. Please lay out your questions and comments. We're gonna get to them before the hour wraps up. Yeah, as best we can at least. Go ahead, Dhoruba.
If I could just get around these interruptions. Damn. So my point is that we have arrived at this moment in history and in time with this idiot Trump and the present cabal of people in power, it's in a direct straight line, historical line from the end of World War II until now. And so that we see that most of these conflicts that are going on, the rise of the black comprador class in the United States, the creation of these false leaders and misleaders, are all a consequence of this history. And it's laid out right before us. And the enemy, the institutions, white supremacy has this institutional memory that is enshrined. And it talks about how the U.S. created the Cold War, how the CIA and the corporations created the military-industrial complex out of this Cold War and used the fear of nuclear holocaust and war to institute overthrows of governments and democratic processes all the way from Iran to South America. And so, and when we look at today and we look at we can go back and snatch just vignettes of history, the Nixon Kennedy debate in 1960, we see that the same issues that they're talking about now, the same rhetoric that they used then, they're using now, about how the U.S. had to reassert its global leadership, how it had to oppose Russian hegemony, or the rise of, and all of these things. And we see in this documentary how the fear of socialism, the fear of people who have emerged out of the Holocaust of World War II were beginning to create socialist paradigms of empowerment for their people, how this had to be thwarted under the guise of fighting communism.
Dhoruba, what was the name of the documentary again?
It's on YouTube. You can get it. It's called the CIA. I believe it's Inside the CIA, or the Story of the CIA. I sent it to you. I sent it to a few people, and I sent it to it all came about because I was talking about this when I got cut off talking to Hakim Green on his show, on his podcast the other day, Sunday. And it's very important for people to understand how this has evolved. And so that when Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1961 or whatever came out and talked about the military-industrial complex and how it was a threat to democracy in America, and Americans need to be afraid of this, we see now today how that manifestation has come true. And how the corporate state, the national security state, has created this democratic fascism in America, where it's possible for someone like Donald Trump, although he's ignorant, who could come along and perpetuate fascism under the guise of democracy, under the guise of the electoral system. And it's just that Trump was too stupid and heavy-handed and too venial to do it. But what if the next president comes along who's quite intelligent, is ideologically motivated, and that's more sophisticated, then he could pull this off. And we see that over 75 million Americans, you understand, voted for this chump, voted for this deceptor. 75 million. We ain't said 75,750,000. We said 75 million. And 55% of white women voted for this. So we shouldn't have no surprise about white women siding with white supremacy, because that's what they did on the plantation. You see? And so what I'm trying to get at is what happened before that's similar to now that makes this moment different and more significant, when we're told that our votes will change this paradigm of power, when we see that in fact it is perpetuating this paradigm of U.S. hegemony, imperialism, support of Zionism, and white supremacy, when it selected this Joe Biden. And you could see in his appointments that he intends to maintain the status quo and reassert U.S. hegemony and global leadership, just like Nixon intended to do when he took power and criminalized marijuana and criminalized resistance to the military-industrial complex, as it manifested itself in the peace war, in the anti-war movement in Vietnam. So we look at what happened to Nixon. Nixon went out of power, and he went out of power because of the same manipulation of the democratic process that he was initiating with the Democratic Party and the plumbers, and trying to manipulate the U.S. electorate. But he didn't have a national police state. He didn't have a national police force. And so he used propaganda and the myth of crime and law enforcement and the Omnibus Crime Act that many black poverty pimps signed on to. The poverty pimps from the 60s are the same Negroes that are now in the Congressional Black Caucus. That's why you see a lot of folks coming along with the names like Kwesi and 60s black nationalist names, because their daddies and their mamas were poverty pimps and academicians who were wearing dashikis and afros and having black women walk 2 feet behind them. This their daddies, this their mamas. And don't make like these niggas came out of nowhere. They came out of somewhere, you see. And so we need to understand how this process has moved into what we have today. Biden has appointed a black woman to represent the U.S. face of imperialism in the United Nations, and the United Nations right now is divided and contentious because the Security Council of the United Nations is not representative of the world's population and the majority of nations in the UN, which are people of color in the third world. And so there's a big beef about that. Before the representative in the United Nations, Trump's representative was a white woman who was a right-wing, white supremacist and racist white woman. And so now he puts a black woman there, puts the face of a black woman there, and that should satisfy black folks, because we do have a woman of color that's vice president, Kamala Harris. You understand? Who there is a reasonable expectation would become the administrator of empire within a year or so after Biden drops dead, or goes into catatonic brain arrest, and they have to sign over the government to her. But some such scenario is some Dr. Strangelove scenario is going to evolve, where girlfriend could become the new Wicked Witch of the West.
But you know that very few of us went for that though this time. That Kamala didn't bring out the black vote. That she couldn't even get her own state. She didn't win any delegates. So you don't see that as a sign of an advance. that she didn't, that ploy didn't work as well as it did? I mean, she was selected because the Wall Street donors to the Democratic Party said that Kamala was a good idea. But she didn't have any support from people on the ground.
Well, why wasn't Susan Rice picked for Secretary of State? Because Mitch McConnell and them considered her a leftist. This is the architect of the U.S. policy of humanitarian intervention to camouflage regime change. That's what they instituted in Libya. My point is that it was all is not real. It's camouflage. Kamala Harris never really had a shot at being selected as president. This was for black women. This was for the black women that's talking about that black woman magic for empire. You see, that's their crew. That was an appeasement to that. She wasn't going to go nowhere, but she did stand up to she did kind of like shocked everybody with her representation at the debates on Biden and his racist history. And so she was definitely going to be selected, her or Stacey Adams or what's the other woman's name? This other sister would have been selected, but fortunately,
well, he did. We talked about this yesterday, and people can go get the video. Lisa Thompson Greenfield, he selected her sister to now I can't even remember the exact role she's going to play, but she comes out of that whole financial and she
isn't she the one that's going to the FCC?
I'm going to look that up in a second. That wasn't my memory of it, but she comes out of she had already worked in the Obama administration, presiding over Africa.
Is she the one that's related to Clyburn? The Negro, the bootlicker from South Carolina?
No, is she? I didn't know that.
Well,
I'm looking that up now. Yeah,
that's some niece or someone that's guaranteed the position in the Biden administration because he's the one that bailed Biden out when
no, she's the I'm sorry, I said this all wrong. Linda Thomas Greenfield. That's who we talked about yesterday. She's going to be the ambassador to the United Nations. She was selected. We talked about this yesterday in terms of she got appointed at the same time of Anthony Blinken, who, to your point, by the way, Susan Rice tweeted was her old friend and somebody who will do a great job as Secretary of State. But Linda Thomas Greenfield is going to be ambassador to the UN, and she comes out of African affairs diplomacy, working under Obama, and then she works with this ASG group that does, investment and public policy influence all around the world. Anyway, but I don't know that she's related to Clyburn, but politically, ideologically, she is. So I think that's even more important.
I mean, to address your commentary about how black folks didn't buy into the Kamala Harris, I think that, like I said, that was delusional. That was meant as a detour. I mean, look at that big field of candidates that you had. That was all designed by the institutional Democratic Party to pretend that there was some type of democratic process going on in amongst neoliberals, but they chose the institutional candidate. They proved who they wanted, and that set up the paradigm. The amount of votes that Kamala Harris got, the type of notoriety that she got, all during the campaign, how she showed up at the Senate hearings when she questioned during the impeachment proceedings, how she stood out. She's a prosecutor. Girlfriend is sharp. She's not no village idiot. She's very astute, very smart. She's very sharp. But she's a hoe. So it's all.
Oh wow.
So I mean, maybe.
No, well, let me ask you. Well, first of all, let me ask you about a couple of questions here. Let's see. First of all, peace to Jackie Lukman and all of her work. And yeah, get your coffee. But Dhoruba, let me ask you about this question here, because sort of to your point, that this brother here says, I'm surprised to hear Dhoruba refer to Kamala Harris as a black woman, which she isn't. all of my heroes from the 80s are dead. I don't know if that's supposed to suggest that Brother Dhoruba should lose his hero status, but just for some I mean, we got to do better than that before we take you off Mount Rushmore of Black liberation, Brother D. But but what do you say about this question of go ahead.
I didn't mean to get chiseled off the, No. The brother got to forgive me. I was just using that rhetorically. The defining as a Black woman, I was just using that rhetorically. That is true. She chases her roots, talk about how she walked along the river Ganges with her dad and all of that. So my apologies. We have to understand that the nature of white supremacy and white supremacist construct is based on turning melanin deficiency into a virtue, as opposed to an anomaly and exception in nature. You see what I'm saying? Which might mean it was inferior, But having said that, yeah, I did use the term somewhat misleadingly when I applied to. So please, my brother, don't.
But maybe it doesn't apply to her. But I am curious, but what about this placement of this Pan-African placement? So on the one hand, I think it's clear that there's a game being played by our political enemies to use Pan-Africanism against us. I don't think it's a coincidence that as Eleanor Cliff said on the McLaughlin group some years ago, when she was trying to convince white voters to support Obama, that by saying that he doesn't have the baggage of slavery, meaning that he was safe to vote for because his African ancestry came straight from the continent and wasn't distilled through this experience here in the United States, making him more of a threat. But as a Pan-Africanist, at least from my perspective, on some level, I would want to accept a Kamala Harris into that diaspora, given her father and his African ancestry through Jamaica, if not anywhere, anything else. But maybe that's my own bias on the fringes of the diaspora myself. So how do you assess all of that? What do you do with all of that?
Well, I think it's very important for us to understand that the people that we're talking about have never been Pan-African in terms of them understanding the paradigm of Africa and its relation to imperialism and to what I call New Age imperialism and globalization. So we have to understand that many of look at this, for instance. Just take this phenomenon. We have to understand, and I said this when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and South Africa was moving towards what was to be a new dispensation, anti-apartheid. And I said that the ANC were never revolutionaries. They were always lawyers seeking to integrate fully as citizens into the European settler state of South Africa. And that they struggle, of course, met the resistance of white supremacy in the European settler state. And they wound up resorting to armed struggle. And the foremost allies of these armed struggles, of these movements during that particular time at the height of the Cold War was the Soviet Union. And it trained many of the cadres of the ANC. In fact, indeed, the Black Panther Party and its mission in Algeria had relationships to Frelimo, to the ANC, MPLA, PAIGC from Guinea-Bissau. All these liberation movements were in Algeria when it was liberated. Having said that, we need to understand that Pan-Africanism was never something that was embraced by these liberation movements as a whole, because they all were fighting for independence. And as Amilcar Cabral well noted, if you read his book on revolutionary, on the liberation of Guinea-Bissau, Amilcar Cabral was making it clear that the liberation process in Africa was a return of Africans to their own historical continuum. And so therefore, when Kwame Nkrumah came to power in Ghana in 1957 and declared that the liberation and the independence of Ghana was meaningless without the unity of all of Africa, the political unity of all of Africa, then you would understand what happened. What happened then at that particular moment? What did the Dulles brothers do then? What did they do in the Congo? What did they do to Patrice Lumumba? What did they do in Nigeria in conjunction with the British and in Guinea and in Guinea-Bissau and the Portuguese and the struggles? What happened? And what actually happened was that the individual nation states, the individual liberation movements never embraced the political unity of Africa. They thought that their unity and their self-determination had to come first. And Julius Nyerere said this, and other African leaders at the time said this. And this was at the height of the Cold War. You got to understand what that really meant. And so what happened, the net result of that was that Africa was never unified politically in order to create the economic paradigm that was necessary as globalization proceeded, as the Europeans tried to reconquer their former colonial territories and failed. They failed in Indochina, they failed in Vietnam, they failed in Korea, they failed in the Pacific, and the only place that where they received a molecule of success was in South America, where they established these fascist police states that took decades to overthrow. So my point is that the African leaders, the movements then, had to join the nation of movements the community of nations at that time once they declared their independence. And we see today, if we look today at Africa, what is happening today? Frelimo now is a repressive regime in Mozambique. It's killing its own people over a contract, over territory that they want to assign to the oil companies that where amount of oil was stolen. The ANC is shooting down gold miners. The ANC is opposed to its own working class peoples and is maintaining the same regime of white land ownership. Look at Zimbabwe. Look at Angola. The MPLA again is killing its own people over contracts with multinational corporations. Look at Nigeria. In fact, look at the Sudan after Bashir. The leadership that came into Sudan and hijacked the people's movement over Bashir. The first thing they in their international relationships is normalized relationships with the Zionist European state of Israel. Once the U.S. Gives them some money and takes them off the terrorist list. Same thing that's happening throughout West Africa. Look at Kenya and Somalia. So we need to understand that these nations, these movements that came up during the decolonization period never developed into full Pan-African leadership. And this was reflected in the original Organization of African Unity that Malcolm attended, okay? What came out of the Organization of African Unity, what we have today? Look at what we have today. Okay, they cannot stop the overthrow of these despots, these Negroes who want to stay in power for 40 and 50 years. They can't intervene in anywhere, whether it's the Cameroon, whether it's Sahel, whether it's Egypt and Darfur. The African Union is useless. But now it's recognizing the economic power of the Black diaspora, and it's inviting us to come to Africa and invest. Invest in what? In European, in secular states, in states that have tied to European finance capital and is in debt to European finance capital. Look at the regime in Ghana right now that's running for re-election. They hired as their promotional team 3 years ago the same people that did the Trump campaign. That were the PR people that aided the Trump campaign. These are the people that Kufuor family and Kufuor's family, if we look at their lineage, they were involved with the CIA and the overthrow of Nkrumah. So we see that all of this stuff has evolved out of the same Cold War period into the elites and classes and contradictions that we have today. So those of us who claim to be Pan-Africans in the diaspora have always failed to translate white supremacy and capitalism into a global a network and political structure that had to be opposed politically at home and at abroad. So when we talk about voting in the South, and we send people to Capitol Hill, who then endorse U.S. policy in support of Israel and the oppression of the Palestinian people, we think that that's okay. that we just have a seat at the table, when we don't question U.S. foreign policy in Africa. What is the U.S. policies towards Africa? We have a Congressional Black Caucus. Have they ever conducted hearings about U.S. policy in Africa and how it affects African people and how it's creating the types of contradictions and wars that we see in Northeastern?
Can I just interrupt real quick? I'm sorry. I used to, for a while when I was with Black Agenda Report, I covered the CBC a little bit and paid a lot of attention with Sister Letitia Stills in particular, who started the CBC report card we were doing some years ago. And I'll never forget going into one of my very first ones, I believe it was with the late great Steve Coakley. And we were walking around, and he was, being from Chicago, he wanted to. He said, "Come with me." And he said, "Watch this." And we went in to go see Bobby Rush's offset room. The Congressman Bobby Rush, former comrade of Fred Hampton in your Black Panther Party, and we walked in, and without even saying a word, it was Coakley. I remember he just sort of panned the room and said, "Look," and just on the walls, it was. This telecom company, this agency, this police group, his whole sponsorship and his whole political arrangement in that room, it was so clear that nothing that you're talking about was going to be discussed in any meaningful way in those rooms. And then it was across the hall at the time where Cynthia McKinney was holding a jam-packed event, raising questions about the assassination of Dr. King and others. But as we walked across from that hall to the more regular CBC gatherings, it was just a very clear, and there are many others we could point to. This is just a stark memory of my own, just very clear that nothing that you're talking about was going to be discussed in those halls.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember when I got in 1990, and one of the first places that I went with, I believe I went with the late Alombe Braff, and I went to Bobby Rush's office and to enlist him in opening up the Congressional Black Caucus to having hearings on the counterintelligence program and how it impacted on Black leadership and the Black political and political vote. And Bobby Rush told me in no uncertain terms that he had more on his plate than to deal with that he had other things he had to deal with. I mean, Bobby Rush is clear that we might look at this movie that's coming out called Judas and the Black Messiah, which has which tries to humanize a snitch and a traitor and the conflicts that he went through personally or politically, as opposed and have Chairman Fred in the background as some type of icon and talking head, much like the South African movies of during the apartheid era. That Bobby Rush could very well. I mean, that whole incident changed Bobby Rush if he ever was anything other than a coward. But it definitely broke him and it changed him, and it set him on a path in Chicago that he used that much like he used his association with the Panther Party and Fred Hampton and his survival of that incident in order to enshrine himself in the political position that he did, much like Jesse Jackson did when he was waving around Martin's bloody T-shirt and established the so-called Rainbow Coalition that he hijacked from Fred and the Black Panther Party and put into Operation Push, and then he became the broker for corporate America and the Black elites that got established in corporate America. We need to understand that these niggas, these Negroes, these coons, these bootlickers, these entrepreneurs, they all came out of Lyndon Baines Johnson's initiative to quell the rebellions in the Black colony in America that was occurring during the 60s when he created the War on Poverty.
But let me ask you this. Forgive the interruption, but I have to ask you this. Well, there's many questions that I have, but one that comes up right away is that just for those of us who have not been as directly involved in some of these struggles that you've experienced, wouldn't it be fair to say that if you're Bobby Rush and as the story goes, or certainly as his version, if I have it correct, it goes, that he was next on the list to be targeted that same night, December 4th, 1969, that they killed Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, and that if you, or not you, but if any of us were to be targeted in such a way that we might respond in a similar way, is that not a fair Is it not fair to say to somebody like that who survives an assassination attempt or watches his comrades get killed like that by the most powerful state in human history, to respond in a conservative reactionary way? Is there no credit or room to be given for that response?
No, man, I came from the South Bronx, man. Fuck all that. You know, I mean, crack trying to kill me all my life. You know, I mean, no, that's not acceptable. I mean, yeah, I mean, Fred Hampton didn't back down. Um, uh, there's a lot of, I mean, look at the list of our martyrs and our freedom fighters who've died. Look at Bashir Hamid, who died in prison.
But I'm talking about the survivors, the ones that don't die. Like, if had Hampton not been the target that night, and one of his comrades been killed in that way, had he?
I doubt Fred would have took the position of running, of saying, man, if you can't beat them, join them. I don't think Fred would have said that. I doubt very seriously that Fred would have said that, and I don't really know of any of my immediate comrades who would have said that. I mean, many of us were.
This wasn't planned. I'm just pulling up this comment here. Omawale Africa is asking. I'm just pulling up this comment that Omawale Africa just happened to ask. Is cowardice an acceptable response to repression? He asked it as a rhetorical question, but that's similar to what I was just asking you there.
Well, as a Muslim, let me say this to the Muslim population. There's a hadith where the Sahaba asked Prophet Muhammad about the last days and how do they oppose tyrants. And Allah's apostle, may peace and blessing be upon him, said that there are 3 ways, I believe it was 3 ways that you can oppose tyranny and oppression. You know, you can speak out against it with your voice, and you could raise your hand against it with your actions, and you could hate it in your heart. And hating it in your heart is the least of faith. Okay, so that means that you could watch oppression and be silent and hate it in your heart, but that's not changing anything. Okay, that's not changing anything. It's those who step forward and those who decide to take a stand that change history. And I might want to point out too, I want to add to this, that the fear of repression is real. Don't make like all of us were like fearless conquerors and nothing, struck fear in our hearts. We all face fear, and we all face doubt about our ability to do something or achieve something. But that doesn't stop certain people from moving forward and conquering their fear and doing something bigger than that. And I just want to say that, many of my comrades who are not with us today, I doubt any one of them would have taken the path that Bobby Rush has taken, based on the possibility of being dead. I mean, nobody gets out of this life alive. And so I don't think that that Bobby Rush should get a pass for being a broken bootlicker and shill for corporate America. No, I think he should be made to pay the consequences for that. That's treacherous behavior. That's betraying the belief and the faith and the trust that the people in Chicago that voted for him time and time again, based on the belief that he stood for something. We need to understand that before the Black Panther Party was transformed and destroyed in 1971, that a poll was taken in 1970 amongst Black people. I believe it was an NBC poll, and it showed that nationally that the Black Panther Party was one of the 3 most respected organizations in Black America. And of those 3 organizations, one was the NAACP, and the other one was, I believe, SCLC. And the Black Panther Party was number 2. Now, how did the Black Panther, a vowed organization that believed in self-defense and did not eschew revolutionary violence, wind up as one of the top 3 picked by Black folks that was most respected, when the other 2 were all nonviolent and were all integrative and all talked about reforming America? And the answer basically is that the Black Panther Party instilled a sense of pride and dignity to the Black community, because we stood up against white supremacy, against the violence of the white supremacist state and the nation state. And Black people needed that. Black people wanted that. Black people respected that. And so I think that Bobby Rush ran and on the basis of that sentiment in the black community, and he exploited it to his own benefit. And the enemies saw the benefit of that. That's why all those plaques on the wall were from corporate America, and it's still happening today. That's what the Clyburns do. That's what the individuals who. That's what the bootlickers like John Lewis. I mean, when was the last time white folks placed a black man in state? In the state capitol. Martin Luther King achieved far more notoriety and worldwide recognition than John Lewis ever did, and nobody placed him in state. Okay, and Malcolm X is revered by generations of black people. They had a hard time just making a postal stamp with his image on it. So John Lewis then represents something that white folks always need, that white folks require. They require a black hero or shero who represents what's considered the American paradigm of equality and democracy and ethical and moral values. John Lewis was a piece of shit. He was a bootlicker. You know, he wasn't the only one that got his head broken in on the Pettus Bridge. At a week after, I believe it was a week after, Malcolm X was assassinated. You know, we need to understand the role that these Negroes have played. They played the same role on the plantation. You know, they played the same role on Catfish Row. You know, Uncle Ben was on the converted rice box for a reason. Aunt Your Mama was on the pancake mix box for a reason. Their recipes may have been stolen by the Colonel, but they still got the food over to the black folks. Black folks, you know. So we need to understand the role that these Negroes play. The Congressional Black Caucus came out of the struggles and the bloodshed of the 60s and the resistance of the people in the 60s to transform their freedom, to transform their existence. Black folks never fought and died for the vote. We fought and died for the right to be left the fuck alone by crackers, to determine our own destiny, to create our own communities and our own livelihood. That's what we fought and died for. The vote was just a means towards that. And nobody went out and said, man, I'm going to go out here and die so I can pull a lever for a goddamn donkey or elephant.
I've left this comment up because, again, I want to say to my dear godfather, Mr. Thomas Porter, one, we got to have him on one of these conversations live as soon as possible. But he who was also heavily involved with those struggles used to talk. I think, if I'm quoting him, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I quote him all the time as saying something like, if everybody who claims to have been on that Pettus Bridge was there, it would have collapsed. And a lot of people use that history to make more reactionary claims that I think you're addressing here about how we should address ourselves to the vote in those histories. So I'm glad you're clarifying that, and I'm glad again that Mr. Porter has joined us, at least in the chat. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in very quickly. I do also want to say, and I'll ask you about this too, and then I want to get to some of these questions in the chat also. I want to just also say again, with you here on the record with a number of my comrades and friends who were involved in somewhat in the background of this coming film about Fred Hampton, or which is really not about Fred Hampton, but I've said to them, and I've even said to Fred Jr., and we have that interview at imixwhatilike.org. I raised this question with him about, what is going to be done. And my prediction is, I think it's clear in the trailer that Fred was going to be reduced to just a caricature yelling rhetoric, Black Power rhetoric in the background, while the story focuses, as you said, on this FBI agent. And as you said, humanizes him and lets that be the conduit for how we get this story told, and all of the politics and ideology and work that Fred and the Panthers were doing and trying to do, and the analysis they were trying to get us to reach, that similar to what you're saying here, is just going to be stripped from the film. So anyway, I just wanted to say that with you, where
Did Christianity evolve because they told the story of Jesus from Judas's perspective?
Perfect. And that's the exact title and perspective we're getting here, right?
But they named this movie Judas and the Black Messiah. I mean, see how they flip the script now. You know, you got black folks out there. You have some hoteppers out there, and you have some once we were kings out there talk about, well, we all know that Jesus was black. You understand? So they just trying to basically say on the down low without really saying it that Jesus was black, and the message just coming out from. I mean, what we gonna get on the mothership here? We're gonna get on some other abstract shit here. You know, I mean, this is Star Wars, like revisited the black version of, you know. Come on, man. You know, we really need to understand the value of propaganda. And this is one of the reasons why I forwarded that video. I mean, that's an eye opener. This is an institutional video about the CIA. And they talked about how, and there was another one that I saw that I think I sent to you, was about how Hitler convinced Germany to go along with his program. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things that they said about Hitler, about Adolf, was that this was when the time when mass media, when the radio first came into effect. And Hitler used to have fireside chats. Remember Roosevelt's fireside chats? Mm-hmm. Hitler used to have fireside chats where he talked to the German people. And this was at a time when he created 7 million jobs out of a Germany that emerged from World War I devastated. And so he used to have fireside chats. And so he used the radio, and then his boy Goebbels, who was in charge of propaganda, understood that if you told a lie, a big enough lie to the masses of people, and you told it often enough, that they will come to believe it. And he used this media, the big lie, in order to convince the German people, you know, that where he was taking them and where he was going was to resolve all of the contradictions that came out of the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty.
If I could just pull this up here real quick, I want to show people that this is a book that I've been reading on and off for years. And it's titled The Jewish Enemy, Nazi Propaganda During World War II and the Holocaust by Jeffrey Herf. And to your point, one of the things, I don't know if, I hope it's coming up, but one of the things that the book talks about is the extent to which for about a decade or more before the actual machinery of the death camps got started, the Nazis had been placing, and German society had been allowing for the placement of anti-Jewish propaganda to be put all over the place very openly, and with an increasing hostility in terms of what was being said, even on posters and bus kiosks and train stations, saying what was going to happen. And part of what the book was arguing was that this laying of the ground not only paved the way to shift the consciousness to in German society to go from we kind of just don't like these people to let's go and kill them all, but made it less likely that even Jews themselves would take it seriously enough to resist in meaningful ways. So I mean, it's really deep. So when I see a lot of parallels happening in terms of certainly African diaspora and yeah,
absolutely. Many German Jews and Polish Jews believed that they were German first and Jews second. They believed in their citizenship. They believed in their roots inside of German culture. And so Hitler's ability to turn the sentiment against them goes all the way back to the historical development and so-called anti-Semitism from the Spanish Inquisition. You know, because the original anti-Semitism was aimed at Sephardic Jews of color from Africa, who had positions of authority and finance in Andalusia or Spain, Moorish Spain. And when the Spanish took it over, they purged all of this, and they made people make allegiance to Christianity and Jesus, and they had the rack and the Inquisition, and they viewed Sephardic Jews, especially those who clung to their religion, as dangerous and anti-Christian and moneylenders and all of this stuff. So I mean, having said all of that, it's interesting to note that the German Jews did not believe that the Holocaust was upon them. European, just like American blacks believe. I mean, what does Kamala Harris mean by America is better than that when she talks about white? I mean, America has never been better than, quote, that. What is that? Okay, I mean, all the way, I mean, from the extermination of the native people and the appropriation of their land to the development of the atomic bomb in the Bikini Islands and using millions of people from the Marshall Islands as human guinea pigs to determine the effects of nuclear fallout blasts on people. This was families, women, and children to this day who were intentionally infected. We know about the Tuskegee experiment. So what do we have to look upon now in the end of a pandemic when they just came up with this new slick vaccine? Who's going to be the first ones to take this shit? Who's going to be the first ones to take this? They say 5 years from now, oh, that vaccine had this type of side effect. Well, we got black babies coming out with 2 heads and all of this shit. You see what I'm saying? So it's not. I'm not being anti-scientific, or I'm not being facetious when I say that we need to understand that black people have been rocked to sleep as well. We do believe that our sacrifices and our our allegiance to we owe America allegiance because we survived it. Because we had to do all of this stuff to survive white supremacy. So therefore we invested in this, that we want equal opportunity, ability to exploit people. We want a seat at the table. And what is the seat at the table of an imperialist empire if not the divvying up of the world's resources and consuming its children and consuming humanity? Okay, that's what we want. That's what black folks want. That's what the Congressional Black Caucus wants. That's why they sign on to the U.S. Foreign policies that make war and that starve and murder people. How did we get it? How did we get into a place that we are now geopolitically in the Middle East? It's our children who are going to go off to war and die in these wars in the Sahel and in West Africa. You know, it's our children who are going to be commanded to die in Afghanistan and die in Syria. And so how is it that we disconnect ourselves from this reality of empire? We disconnect ourselves through these Negroes and Islamist leaders, none of whom are Pan-African. And I just want to drop that back in there, but all of whom are trans-Africans. They believe in trans-Africa. They believe in investment in Africa. They believe in exploitation Africa, putting business, talking about black businesses in Africa. The black clergy is talking about opening up churches with other and connecting with other charlatans on the continent. You understand, to fleece the masses for a white Jesus. I mean, everybody's involved in this. You see, and so it's very difficult to speak out against this when our voices are marginalized and our struggles are not revisited and understood by those young people who are in the streets today. We have no connection. This movement has no connection. The present movement against white supremacy and the so-called Black Lives Matter movement has no understanding of its historical roots and resistance to white supremacy and capitalism since World War II. They don't have that connection. So they don't understand that in many respects, the reason why the U.S. behaved the way it did is because in every one of those struggles in the 60s, we actually won. We were successful. The U.S. did get out of Vietnam. Saigon is no longer called Saigon. It's called Ho Chi Minh City. Cuba still is an independent country. And Fidel still was one of the greatest human beings of the 20th century. We did win banished apartheid in South Africa. Africa was, quote, decolonized. We actually won. But what happened is those victories were turned on their head by the system and by capitalism and by the nation states of Europe, turned on its head to benefit them and made it look like they were the ones that reformed themselves and that they are humanistic organizations that are opposed to slavery and opposed to all of these things. And what has arisen in their place? We have these nation states like Saudi Arabia. We have nation states like Mozambique and South Africa and Guinea that are run by despots, that are run by individuals who have concrete ties to the exploiters of their people. So we really don't understand that we've already won this struggle. So when we talk about something like defunding the police, we don't understand what we're really saying. You cannot defund the police and expect them to change. You can't take money from the police because the police are the essential ingredient of the national security state in controlling its masses of people. But the problem with America is that it doesn't, the problem for fascists in America, for corporate elite in America, is that there's no national police force. And am I still here?
You're here.
When you went off.
No, I'm just putting you on solo for a second. But yeah, you still.
I just needed to talk to somebody. You got me talking to a blank screen.
Oh, my bad. Here we go. My bad. My bad.
You know,
Sorry about that.
I'm only getting free because I'm talking to you.
Okay, my fault.
If this was MSNBC, I'd be stuttering. I'd be all guarded and stuff. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that the people, the movements today don't understand that they stand on victories that we've achieved yesterday. You see, and so that we should not be talking about defunding the police. Defunding the police is a consequence of community control of law enforcement and community control of public safety. That automatically changes the funding paradigm once you change the paradigm of policing. And how are you going to change the paradigm of policing with an institution that has arisen out of our slavery and out of our repression and out of control and out of the control of capitalist control of the working class? How do we change that? Well, one of the ways we have to do is we have to break the back of law enforcement as is presently constituted. And how do we break their back? We have to go after the police unions. We have to defund we have to decertify police unions. We have to go into the courts of America collectively as a movement, as a class action, and demand the decertification of the police unions, because the police are not working class workers. They're not workers. They're armed agents of the state. And as such, they're prohibited. They cannot strike. They cannot enter into certain political activities as armed agents of law enforcement. But their certification doesn't say that. Their certification has them interfering in policing in the Black community, has them determining who gets selected and who gets selected for political office. If a mayor in the city doesn't have the backing of the police union, then he's going to have people raising money against him. The law enforcement people, the unions collect money and take their endowments and put them into corporations that are involved in making weaponry, that are involved in repression, that are involved in discrimination against poor people and ordinary working people. So we have to rethink their certification as a union. What powers should a union of armed agents of the state have? I think that initiating this alone would help us clarify the role that law enforcement has to play in our community, and how it has to be rethought, and how it has to be possible for the community to control public safety on all of its levels.
Dhoruba, unfortunately, I have a class in 15 minutes that I have to go to. So I hate that it's me that's the cause of pushing us to a wrap. But I thought of a segue here. One, I just want to let a couple folks know in the chat that there's a number of other conversations we have with Brother Dhoruba at imixwhatilike.org, including where he talks about ADOS and some other groups, and we'll definitely ask him to do that some more. But I wanted to ask in this last couple of minutes if we could use this segue of you talking about the police and what we need to do about their unions, and to some of the questions that have come up in the chat about what we need to do, just generally speaking. If we could use the story you've shared, at least some of with me offline, about Larry Davis. And I don't know if you want to save that for some other future project, but I can't help but kind of tease that, because I think the story of your interaction with Larry Davis in real time says a lot about not only what the police do and how they function, but what needs to be done in response. So I only have about 10 minutes, but if you want to maybe tease some of that or use those 10 minutes any way you want, and maybe tell me that I'm jumping the gun here, but
yeah,
that story to me is and if that's a preview, let it be. But that to me is as fire as it gets, and I can't wait. So,
well, I got some young brothers and that are talking about doing this sizzle reel for Netflix on the Panther 21 and myself, called 20+1, and some of these things we really want to go into. But the thing with Larry Davis is my relationship with Larry Davis was very superficial, in the sense that I met Larry Davis when he came to prison.
And can you quickly just say who Larry was, just for anybody who might not know the story, which people really do need to know the story?
Was a young street brother, a young hustler who got caught up on the in the street game with drugs, and who the police used, intimidated and used to sell their drugs. I mean, they used him to snitch on other drug dealers and maintain so that they can make the necessary drug busts, to enhance themselves. And at the same time, the drugs that they took off of other dealers, they gave him to Larry Davis so that he could do his thing. But Larry Davis developed a level of consciousness and awareness of what the drugs were doing in the community and the role that he was playing, and he rebelled. And when he rebelled, he threatened to expose all of this, and the police came after him, and the police unions were behind this. They came after him. First, they came to try to kill him on a pretext on a drug bust. Larry Davis actually shot his way out of this trap and got away, and he was a fugitive, and he became somewhat of a celebrity in the Black community because on several occasions they tried to ambush him and capture him, and they couldn't.
And at the time, it was the largest so-called manhunt in New York State history, if not the country, if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, when they were because he shot up, he shot like 6 cops and got away, right?
Right, and they
jumping out of a window. I mean, it's a fascinating. I mean, it's an amazing story.
Story was up there with Twyman Myers, another unknown soul who was in the Black Liberation Army. He was a young soldier in the Black Liberation Army who on 2 or 3 occasions escaped ambushes. And I mean, where he jumped out the window, and Denzel Washington style, man, and ran along the railroad tracks, the L, shooting at the police, diving on taxi cabs and all of this.
Wow.
I mean, real. You understand? But people don't know Twyman Myers. In the story in the BLA, they killed him, they ambushed him and shot him down, and they bragged about it, But with Larry Davis, his story was a little more sensationalized because of the connection between drugs. The drug war was at its height in New York. The police department was trying to burnish his image after the Knapp Commission and the stories of corruption and all of this stuff. And Larry Davis was coming out at this time, and I believe at that time some of the lawyers that would later on be involved with a Tawana Brawley thing. I believe one of the lawyers. I was in prison, so you must forgive me if I kind of like fudged the details because I wasn't quite like out on the streets at that moment. In fact, I might have been in solitary confinement, but in the shoe. But anyway, one of the lawyers that was well known, in a Black lawyer, managed to arrange his surrender so that they couldn't kill him, so he could tell his story. And he actually went on trial, I believe, and got acquitted for shooting these cops, which was unprecedented. So the unions went buck wild. How could you get on acquitted for blatantly killing cops? Because he told his story to the jury and how they came to kill him. They didn't come to arrest him. That they were complicit in the drug trade, and that these people were his crime partners. Actually, they should have been in the dock with him, And so they went after him, and they eventually captured him. They eventually took him to jail and to prison, and that's where they killed him. And that's how I met him briefly in one of the segregation units. They used to chain this brother to the door, literally chain him to the door of the cell when he had to go out for a legal visit. And they would just swing the door open with him chained to the door. And they tortured this brother in prison like this. It was all done under the watchful eye of the New York City Policemen Benevolent Association and the Prison Guard Association. They had a vendetta to kill this man, and they did kill him. And I just advised those people who were telling my story to understand that they didn't have to use a device that they were going to use. They were going to use a Hollywood type device where they can get my story and the story of the 21 into the consciousness of younger people by having this young rebellious person come into prison, and then he meets me in prison and I'm like Obi-Wan Kenobi on a prison bunk cell, and I said, man, I was never Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm too black to crack. I'm too old. So you can't portray me like this. And they said, so well, but we was just trying to make sure that Netflix would accept it because it had to be watered. I said, they didn't either accept it. This ain't no Judas and the Black Messiah thing. I ain't trying to humanize my enemy. under no circumstances. I said, if you want to tell the story, tell the true story. You know, there's true stories out there that have all the drama and all of the ingredients of a good story and an engrossing story that can educate people. You don't have to make shit up about a boxer, a black boxer who doesn't throw the fight and the mob tries to kill him and he kills the assassins and they send him to jail and that's how he meets me. I said, man, you got a real story out there. What about this boy? Tell his story. You know, because his story is real. I never viewed myself as an exception to anybody's rule. I grew up in the South Bronx, and I believe just like every other kid in the South Bronx that grew up, I just had the fortune from Allah to survive all of this. And many of the people that grew up with me, most of them are dead and haven't survived. And so that doesn't make me exceptional at all. You know, and so I mean, you notice I kind of eschew self-aggrandizement and self-praise. It's hard for me to promote myself because I don't see myself I see myself as part of my generation and a generation that lived and died and went through certain things that's not fully appreciated by the generations that follow. And so that's why I don't call my biography that I'm trying to get done a biography. I call it a bio story. It's a story of a generation. It's a story of a generation that grew up in the wake of World War I and the Korean War and in the shadows of the projects being built in our communities and urbanization and white supremacy and rebellion. That's my generation. And so that's why I encourage this telling of this boy, Larry Davis's story. Because if it's not told, it'll never come out. And black people will never understand. And Larry Davis is no different than any of the ordinary brothers and sisters right out on the streets now, gang banging and the Crips and the Bloods are slinging that yayo, and that have descended into this tribalism of gang affiliations that goes from one generation to the next. That they could break this cycle. And Larry Davis was an individual that tried to break that cycle, and he paid for it with his life.
Well, Brother Dhoruba, we certainly appreciate that you survived and are here to help tell us some of these stories and help with this analysis. We certainly greatly appreciate the work that you are continuing to do and have done. And I want to just say again to those who are looking at this now, and we'll see this later, check Dhoruba at his Cash App and his website, and let's send him some support for his continued good work and having survived all of these wars and these battles he's been talking about for so long and still standing strong to offer us I think the kind of analysis we certainly need. If people don't want to fully adopt it, it certainly needs to be on the table and part of the ideas people put into their mix. So with that, unfortunately, I do have to run. It's my fault. We have to end right now. So my apologies to you, Dhoruba, and everybody watching. Thanks to all for checking us out. I mixwhatilike.org for more, bin-Wahad.com for more with him. We'll certainly be looking to have you back as much as possible. And to those who did ask, we will be doing these live streams more often and as much as I can get them in. So Dhoruba, thanks again, my man, and peace to you. As I know you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and we'll look to catch up with you as soon as possible. Take good care, my man.
All right, black man. Take care, man.
Peace.
Peace out.